NBC 10 breaking news.
20 minutes of nonstop news begins with a hostage situation at a Delaware prison. Skyforce 10 was over the James T. Vaughn Correctional Center in Smyrna as emergency crews ran out of the building with someone on a stretcher.
Let's give you a better idea of exactly where this is. The prison is located in Smyrna, not far from Delaware Route 1. It is near the Newcastle County and Kent County line. NBC 10 Delaware reporter Tim Furlong is joining us live near that scene.
And Tim, we know you're being kept far back for safety reasons, but what can you show us from where you are?
Yeah, we're about 300 yards away, I'd say 350 yards away. And this morning, the call went out to get firefighters here at first for smoke in the building. It quickly became apparent it was a hostage situation. I'm told inmates have taken staff members hostage. We don't know at this point how many inmates or staff members are involved, but you can see from our vantage point a few hundred yards away, there is really quite a buildup of law enforcement. Now, a while ago, take a look at this. Skyforce 10 was overhead when a person was rushed out on a gurney. The Department of Corrections not saying if it was an inmate or staff member. We also want to be real clear right now. Skyforce 10 is not overhead right now. Police have asked helicopters to leave the area because they tell me the hostage takers do have access to television, and police don't want to give up any of their tactical position information. Now, I also want to show you a video an NBC 10 photographer just captured on the opposite side of this complex from where I'm standing. SWAT vehicles have just made their way into the complex. They're making their way over to the scene where this is all unfolding. It's a big kind of sprawling campus. And as we come back live to our camera here, I can tell you the governor's office has not communicated at all today about this, despite my repeated inquiries. The Department of Correction is planning a news conference we're hearing either here or in Dover. The new head of the department, by the way, was sworn in just a couple weeks back. He used to be the warden at this very facility. He knows what's going on here. We were told early on there's no threat to the public outside of this facility, and all state prison facilities are now in lockdown. We are told that is standard operating procedure. One other thing to add, the Delaware News Journal, the main newspaper in the state, is reporting that they received a call with demands from the hostage takers. Now, as we come back to me here, I can tell you I'm going to try to get a listen to that and learn more about this situation as it unfolds. And as soon as I learn more information, I'm certainly going to bring it to you, because I am told from the Department of Corrections this is very much an active situation still at this point, hours after it began. We're live in Smyrna. Tim Furlong, NBC 10 News.
NBC 10 breaking news.
Right now at 5, a prison on lockdown. Police say there is a hostage situation inside the Vaughn Correctional Center. We have been following this breaking situation all afternoon.
Skyforce 10 is live over the scene right now, being kept away quite a distance there, but you do see the facility. We have crews inside, also outside the prison. We are monitoring the very latest developments for you.
We are also expecting an update from authorities at any moment. As soon as that begins, we'll of course bring it to you live.
Right now, let's go to NBC 10's Tim Furlong, who is at that prison. Tim, what's the latest information you have about the situation going on in the prison walls behind you?
Yeah, certainly we're going to get more information at that news conference, which is about 15 minutes behind. It was supposed to happen a few minutes ago. Any minute it's going to happen, like you guys said. But it's all unfolding, still unfolding, I should say, in the prison complex here, about 350 yards away from our position here in Smyrna. Officials say a number of inmates took some facility staffers hostage this morning. The Department of Corrections, the governor's office have said very little about what's actually happening. The Delaware News Journal is reporting that they received a call from an inmate today. I listened to that call. The person basically just says inmates are upset with the treatment they received. They say some reports aren't filled out accurately, things like that. They say they want better management inside the prison. Now, this has certainly been a tough day, not just for the people inside the prison, but also for their families outside. Take a look at video from Skyforce 10 earlier. Overhead is an injured person who was rushed out of the area. We don't know if that was an inmate or hostage yet. I'm told employees who deal with the inmates are not allowed to bring their cell phones inside. So imagine that. Many families just don't know if their loved ones who work inside the complex are somehow involved in this, or if they are hurt, and everything, of course, is locked down. Now, we just spoke with the son of a maintenance man inside. He's driving around the perimeter, this young guy, trying desperately to find out if his dad is okay.
Came down here as quick as I could to see what was going on, and haven't heard from him. He's not allowed to have his phone on him, so
if he doesn't have his cell phone, that doesn't mean he's definitely involved in this. It could, I mean, he just can't have his phone.
Oh yeah, and I hope for the best. I'm sure he is. I'm sure he's fine. But the concern, naturally, I want to come down here and see what's going on.
Yeah, young guy there hoping his pop is all right. Everybody hoping his dad's okay. And so many other people that work inside this facility that handles about 2,500 maximum security inmates and at all levels, really. Ethan and many families certainly wondering what's happening inside and, more importantly, how this is going to end. And as we come back live here, I can tell you that, again, we're waiting for that news conference to begin. As soon as it does, we'll bring it to you live. We're live in Smyrna. Tim Furlong, NBC 10 News.
NBC 10 breaking news.
A tense hostage situation inside a Delaware prison.
It could have been over, man.
First-hand accounts from inside the walls.
You have everyone's attention.
Negotiators trying to bring this crisis to a peaceful end.
We want to resolve this peacefully.
Tonight, a community on edge as the standoff reaches its 12th hour.
It's kind of nerve-wracking.
Tonight, new developments on the hostage situation in Delaware. Good evening, I'm Jim Rosenfield. Skyforce 10 is live tonight once again over the James Vaughn Correctional Center in Smyrna. In the last few hours, we've learned there were 4 prison employees held hostage, not 5 as first reported by officials. 2 of them have been released. NBC 10 has team coverage outside the prison in Smyrna, and we begin with NBC 10's Andrea Klein-Thomas with the latest on the hostage negotiations. Andrea.
Well, let's start with those 2 correctional officers who have been released. The first one is being treated for non-life-threatening injuries. The second one, at our last update, we're told, was being checked out by medical professionals. Meanwhile, at this very moment, negotiations continue. Skyforce 10 shows more inmates being let out of the C building tonight at the James Vaughn Correctional Facility, hours into a hostage standoff.
How the COs treating the inmates. All the way the COs treat the inmates. That have to change. Education. We want education first and foremost.
Inmates contacted the News Journal twice through family to make their demands known after taking 4 corrections employees hostage.
And if they keep on playing games, it's going to get ugly.
Among their concerns, their treatment in the facility and access to rehabilitation. One hostage nervously tried answering questions of News Journal staff.
I don't know who's taking me to hospital. There's a lot of them, man. I don't know. They got my face covered.
By 8 o'clock tonight, Governor John Carney arrived at the Smyrna prison.
We have put all the resources that we have to bear to get our employees out.
At that point, 2 of the 4 employees had been released and were receiving medical attention. 27 inmates had also been transferred from the building.
Let's go ahead and end it. We can do this.
As the negotiators try to bring this to a peaceful end, inmates continue to make demands.
Once this matter is resolved safely, then that will be the time to talk. The inmates want to talk about conditions, privileges, those types of things.
Now, prison officials would not say if the facility was understaffed. All they will say is that they continue to fill vacancies. As you know, it's a very fluid situation. You can count on us to bring you all of the latest updates. Reporting live in Smyrna, Andrea Klein-Thomas, NBC 10 News.
All right, Andrea, still on this story. NBC 10 spoke with people in the community who are praying this comes to a peaceful end. We also have a first-hand insight into what it takes to be a hostage negotiator. NBC 10's Randy Gyllenhaal continues our live team coverage from outside the prison in Smyrna. Randy.
Well, Jim, here in Smyrna, almost everybody knows somebody that works here at the prison. Locals have been glued to their phones, looking for updates and hoping for some sort of resolution. As former hostage negotiators tell us, the best way forward is a calm and steady hand.
Come on now, man. That's a simple request, right?
Now, do you think it's really that simple?
Negotiations extend into the night as a tense unease spreads through the small town of Smyrna.
Just come up out of there, you know, surrender.
Neighbors who live near the prison have friends and family who work there, and tonight they're praying for a peaceful outcome.
I feel sorry for the loved ones that are on the outside waiting to find out what's going on the inside.
The prison employs 600 corrections officers. Most of them live in town, and throughout the day, family came to the staging area to check on loved ones.
I'm sure he's fine, but the concern, naturally, I want to come down here and see what's going on.
Tonight, 2 of those officers are still held hostage. Retired Philly PD negotiator Ray Carr says the key is to remain calm, gain the trust of the inmates, and keep the conversation going.
Time is on your side. You have time. Once you make a lethal step towards something, there's no way to go back to negotiate.
Police are communicating with the inmate ringleaders by radio.
We're praying really hard that everybody comes out of it okay.
The union representing the guard says the 2 remaining hostages work daily in those cell blocks interacting with inmates. He says lately there have been some issues between guards and prisoners.
We'll talk about all that stuff at a later date. There's issues, absolutely. But right now the important issue is getting those two officers out of that building and home safely to their families.
Meantime, that former hostage negotiator tells us that it is good news that those hostage takers have already released 2 of those prison officials. We're live in Smyrna. Randy Gyllenhaal, NBC 10 News.
And we want to let you know we're keeping our crews outside the prison all night long in case there are any new developments. You can get updates overnight on the NBC 10 app, and we're going on the air a half hour early in the morning at 4 a.m.
NBC 10 breaking news.
We have an update on breaking news we've been following for you. An officer has been found dead following a hostage situation at a prison in Smyrna, Delaware. Here is a live look at the James Vaughn Correctional Center, where inmates took 4 employees hostage yesterday morning. Around 5 this morning, Delaware State Police breached the building where they were being held. They rescued 1 employee. The guard was found dead. 2 other hostages were released yesterday. Here's what it looked like around 6 this morning, just after police went into that building. Dozens of inmates were handcuffed on the ground. Now, the governor and other officials will give us an update at 10:30. We will bring that to you live. You can also go to the NBC 10 app for updates.
A tense 2-day inmate uprising ends in a deadly standoff.
This was a very sad day across the state of Delaware.
Corrections officers mourning the death of one of their own.
We lost one of our family members, and it pains my heart to make these statements.
Count on NBC 10 to cover every angle of this big story, from the negotiations.
I said it's no good. We've been told you that.
To the victims, to the inmates at the center of it all.
NBC 10 breaking news.
And I'm Jim Rosenfield, live from Smyrna, Delaware at the James T. Vaughn Correctional Center. Today we have learned several new developments about the hostage situation that ended in this deadly standoff. Here's what we know right now at this hour. The hostage situation ended around 5 this morning when officers stormed the prison. Sergeant Stephen Floyd was found at that point and pronounced dead minutes later. And we just learned Sergeant Floyd tried to warn other corrections officers that the inmates had set a trap and that they should get out. And we also just found out he leaves behind a wife and 3 children. NBC 10 has a team of reporters across Delaware working every angle of this big story. Let's begin with NBC 10 Delaware Bureau reporter Tim Furlong. Tim, as Governor Carney said earlier today, a very sad day for the first state.
Yeah, Jim, I'm going to be real up front with you. Here in Newark today, we had a lot of questions that we didn't get answers to every single one of them. But at this point, it's pretty clear we have a good timeline of how this all really unfolded. Delaware's governor said he prayed this ordeal would end peacefully.
But it didn't.
10:30 Wednesday morning, inmates in the T-shaped C building somehow overtake 3 corrections officers and a counselor. They call the Delaware News Journal tip line with their demands.
How the COs treating the inmates. All the way the COs treat the inmates. That have to change. Education. We want education first and foremost. They keep on playing games. It's going to get ugly.
At 2:25, Skyforce 10 there as 1 hostage is removed on a gurney, non-life-threatening injury. Another officer was released at 8 p.m. and then around 11.
3 maintenance workers that were hiding in the basement that the inmates didn't know about were able to work their way from the basement up to the roof, and our tactical teams were able to rescue them.
The negotiations went all night over an officer's radio. It was all broadcast on the web as inmates demanded to speak to the governor.
It could have been over. Where is Carney at?
Corrections officials say the inmates demanded the water be turned on in the building. Turns out they used it to fill up steel footlockers to make a blockade at the entrances. When inmates seemed like they were stalling and police hadn't heard anything about Sergeant Floyd, they used a backhoe to knock in the doors at 5 this morning. In 2 minutes, the female counselor was safe. Inmates were getting taken to a prison yard outside, and that is when they found Sergeant Floyd unresponsive.
We lost one of our family members, and it pains my heart to make these statements.
Yeah, now throughout the whole ordeal, we saw inmates coming out of the building in groups, some small, some big. At this point, though, I'm told it's not clear if any of them were involved in the execution of this plan. They kind of snuck out, or if they were trying to get out just to get away from the whole mess. At this point, we are told all 120 inmates who were in that building when this all started are considered suspects. It's also not clear at this point if this was a well-organized plan. It sounds like there have been some rumblings with guards, about guards in the last couple of weeks. But again, officials still trying to figure out if this was more spontaneous or a well-planned event. We're going to work to get more of those answers for you. We're live in Newark, Delaware. Tim Furlong, NBC 10 News.
Many questions to be answered, Tim. All right, Skyforce 10 was overhead this afternoon as a procession brought the body of Sergeant Floyd from the Vaughn Correctional Center to the medical examiner's office where that autopsy will be conducted. Officers on motorcycles, they led the way. And along the route, we spotted one officer who wasn't even part of the procession stopped on an overpass. He got out of his vehicle and he saluted before getting back in his car and driving away. About 30 minutes later, the procession arrived at the medical examiner's office. A flag-draped coffin carried the body of Sergeant Stephen Floyd, a 16-year veteran of the Department of Corrections. The governor today has ordered flags across the state to be flown at half-staff in honor of Sergeant Floyd, and he also vowed to leave no stone unturned, his words there, in this investigation.
These brave men and women go to work every day knowing that they may not come home. We owe them an incredible debt of gratitude.
And late this afternoon, the union representing the prison workers says they are risking their lives with a smaller staff at this correctional center that you see behind me. Our team coverage continues now with NBC 10's Rosemary Connors, who is live in Dover this afternoon. Rosemary, the union says this is a problem that was in fact no secret to the state.
That's right, Jim. In fact, the union gave us these complaints written by officers to state authorities telling them that they're being attacked on the job at facilities all across Delaware. Also today, the union president had some harsh words for Delaware's last governor.
Sergeant Floyd's death is due directly to staffing issues that have been going on with the Department of Correction through the Jack Markell administration for the last 8 years.
The first words from the president of Delaware's Correctional Officers Union pointed the blame directly at the previous governor, insisting that the union's complaints were ignored.
Staffing, retention, shortages, overtime. We've been talking about these issues for quite some time.
Is the prison understaffed? We face staffing challenges every day throughout the state.
Delaware's Secretary of Safety and Homeland Security admits that statewide on any given day, prisons are short about 90 positions of 1,700.
When we are short-staffed, we compensate with overtime. If we can't fill holes, wardens have authority to cancel visits, cancel programs, and things like that.
The fact that our overtime budget is over $20 million is not safe.
With tears in their eyes and black bands over their badges, Sergeant Floyd's colleagues listened to their union president say that this could have been prevented.
Sergeant Floyd didn't have to die yesterday. We've been asking for help from the previous governor.
NBC 10 did reach out to Governor Markell. NBC 10 did reach out to Governor Markell to get a comment on this, but no response yet. As for Governor Carney, who's only been on the job just a few weeks, the union president says that he has the utmost faith that they can work together to fix this staffing issue. Reporting live in Dover, I'm Rosemary Connors, NBC 10 News.
All right, Rosemary, and NBC 10 has been talking to locals here who say they are just shocked this situation escalated and turned deadly. NBC 10 spoke with a retired prison guard who spent almost 30 years in those same cell blocks. He says the inmates had other options to relay their concerns and complaints.
They usually take a group of inmates and, talk to them, try to find out what the problem, try to resolve the problem.
In a phone call to a local newspaper, the hostage takers complained about abusive guards. They also asked for more education and rehabilitation opportunities. Meantime, this group of demonstrators showed up at Vaughn Correction Center this morning. They're from an advocacy organization based in Baltimore. They say they were here to show their support for the inmates and that the Department of Corrections should or could have prevented this from happening in the first place.
This could have all been avoided had DOC, hired the proper people. If DOC would have put in place the proper protocol and procedures, this would all have been avoided.
The demonstrators are calling for an independent investigation into the standoff here at the prison and the events that followed. Negotiators, though, they worked for hours to try to bring the standoff to a peaceful end. And coming up at 4:30, a former hostage negotiator will join us live to break that process down for us, explain to us how it works. But for now, let's send it back to the studio and Aaron Coleman in Philadelphia. Aaron?
Yeah, Jim, obviously they were hoping for a different outcome, wishing that those inmates who were holed up inside Building C would have just surrendered sometime last night. This deadly outcome, they say, comes amid a lot of growing tensions inside those prison walls. Sergeant Stephen Floyd's body was taken by motorcade from the prison where he died.
It's very sad for the family.
As strangers in this small town lined the street to pay their respects.
We got friends that work here too, and we've just been hearing it, family members and shot.
In Smyrna, nearly everyone knows somebody who works at Vaughn Correctional. At the Smyrna Diner, locals followed every update during the day-long standoff. Heartbroken, it ended in violence.
Yeah, it is surprising, that it went this far,
During the siege, the inmates complained about abusive treatment. Officials and even locals here acknowledge growing tensions inside those prison walls.
That C building was a pretty tough building to work.
Robert Watson is a retired prison guard who spent 28 years inside those cell blocks.
You will hear off and on, different stuff. So I think it's been something waiting to happen.
He says the inmates had other options instead of a hostile takeover to voice their complaints to prison staff.
They usually take a group of inmates and, talk to them, try to find out what the problem, try to resolve the problem. Treat them fair and firm, but just don't let them take advantage of you.
I also had the chance to talk with the town's mayor today. She tells me, of course, the residents here are devastated. So many people know or have loved ones who work here. She tells me the town is organizing a candlelight vigil that'll be tomorrow at 6 o'clock at the municipal park. Live in Smyrna, Randy Gyllenhaal, NBC 10 News.
We sent NBC 10 investigator George Spencer to dig into these staffing issues. He's back in our NBC 10 studio. So, George, what have you learned about a shortage of prison workers in the state?
Jim, by its own admission, right now, Delaware's Department of Corrections has some 90 vacancies for corrections officers across the state. As you've heard, critics believe those staffing gaps actually led to Sergeant Floyd's death. So we've been researching what proper staffing would actually look like. The U.S. Department of Justice says there is no blanket staff-to-inmate ratio requirement or even suggestion because there's so much variety from prison to prison. But Corrections Officers Union across the country have supported a ratio of about 3 inmates for every 1 staffer as being desirable. Now, we don't know how many officers were working at Vaughn yesterday, but across all of Delaware's prisons, there are about 7,000 inmates with about 1,700 total corrections officers. So we can confirm that Delaware's ratio is more than 4 inmates for every 1 officer. That ratio in Delaware is closer to the staffing levels in some federal prisons as recently as 2015. At that time, the Bureau of Prisons director told Congress such numbers were a significant challenge to operating his prisons safely. We know that union leaders down in Delaware believe the numbers presented publicly today actually understate the scope of the problem. They believe with tens of millions of dollars in corrections overtime last year, the vacancy rate is really much higher than we're being told. For the investigators, George Spencer, NBC 10 News.
Something to keep looking into, George. Well, this isn't the first hostage situation either at this prison. NBC 10 has learned that in 2004, an inmate took a prison counselor hostage and sexually assaulted her. After 7 hours, officers shot and killed the inmate.
From family to colleagues to friends, hundreds gathered to remember Lieutenant Stephen Floyd as a hero. The grief of Lieutenant Floyd's family was palpable at Smyrna Municipal Park tonight as hundreds honored his life and sacrifice. The 47-year-old corrections officer was killed by inmates at the James T. Vaughn Correctional Center after being held hostage with 3 other colleagues. Tonight, an autopsy revealed Floyd died of homicide by trauma.
My name is Officer Wilkinson. I was held hostage with him. I just wish to God it was me instead of him.
Beaten and bruised, a corrections officer unexpectedly emerged from the crowd. He only worked at the prison for a few weeks.
Every time I seen him, he treated me with respect, whether I was new or been there a while. He was a good man to me.
Then a tearful embrace with Lieutenant Floyd's widow, who reassured the officer, saying, "Thank God for your life."
He is going to use you.
Faith was central during this vigil as it provided some comfort. Lieutenant Floyd was a father of 3 and grandfather, a Mason who served his community.
He saved those other officers' lives by telling them to get out of the building.
And in death, he's being hailed a hero.
Did you ever know that you're my hero?
He was that little gentle giant, and like the song that we closed the program with, The Hero, it fits him.
Andrea Klein-Thomas, NBC 10 News.
New perspective tonight into the deadly prison takeover in Delaware, this time from an inmate. The prisoner filed a lawsuit with his version of what went down during that 18-hour standoff during which an officer was killed. NBC 10 investigative reporter Mitch Blocker has been digging into this suit, and he's here to tell us what he's learned. Mitch.
Jim, this is one of our first inside looks into the prisoner takeover at the Vaughn Correctional Center. Prisoner Donald Parkell details what he says he witnessed as some prisoners coordinated an attack to take over part of the prison. He claims he was a hostage along with 2 other prisoners. He says together they tried to protect a prison counselor from the rioting inmates. He writes no more than 10 inmates coordinated the attack. He says he witnessed 3 officers being savagely beaten while they were restrained and hooded. Of course, Lieutenant Stephen Floyd was killed in the attack. Parkell describes the moment the Joint Task Force eventually took back Building C, writing they stormed into the building using a backhoe, concussion grenades, and overwhelming numbers. Parkell also claims officers beat inmates once they took back the prison. He claims since the riot, inmates have been denied sheets, clothes, and in some cases, food. Now, prison officials say all 120 inmates who were in Building C at the time of the attack are considered suspects. They are not confirming whether or not Parkell is one of them. The prisoner takeover is still being investigated. For the investigators, I'm Mitch Blocker, NBC 10 News.
This is a photo of Michael Carrillo and his mother, Matilda. He's serving 23 years at Vaughn Correctional, a sentence which she says turned into a nightmare this month.
It was horrendous what they lived through.
Inmate Donald Parkell offers a first-hand account through this handwritten lawsuit. Carrillo backs up what's in it through a conversation with her son, including that no more than 10 inmates coordinated the attack, took hostages, and lit fires. This mother got several phone calls during the crisis.
It was very dark and very smoky. There was water running all over.
The fires set off sprinklers, filling locker boxes used for barricades. But Parkell says he and Carrillo spent the standoff trying to protect a prison counselor who others took hostage.
I said, you guys promised me you will protect her at all costs. Let me tell you something, they did protect her at all costs.
But since the end of the revolt, Carrillo and other mothers of inmates remain worried.
And it's awful.
Sheila White Kelly's son claims, just as the lawsuit does, that officers beat inmates when they took back the prison.
He said the jaw felt like it was broken once he slapped him so hard.
This account also reveals Lieutenant Stephen Floyd was brutally murdered early in the attack.
My heart breaks. I know Miss Floyd's breaks, his family's breaking. And what did the other ones give us? Nothing but more heartaches. And it's a nightmare.
Leaders at Delaware Corrections won't comment on this lawsuit. The inmate is not looking for money in this case, but rather improved conditions inside the prison. I'm Drew Smith, NBC 10 News.